Hi everyone. A case was brought forward by Dr. Cora Stack, an independent candidate for the presidential election, around the constitutionality of the presidential selection process. Now, the High Court judge last week declared that the party whip system cannot be used in the presidential election selection process. Now, that High Court judge was Mark Heslin, and today he made his judgment. Of course, a day in advance of the presidential election, which has been held tomorrow, October the 24th, in Ireland, where we have three candidates on the ballot paper. Jim Gavin, of course, who's withdrawn from campaigning but still on the ballot paper. We have Catherine Connolly and also Heather Humphreys. And of course, many have been blocked from entering this presidential election race through the party whip system used by Simon Harris back in early September on his 260 plus Fine Gael councillors. And today the judgment was that the whip system predates the Constitution and he cannot write new laws. So last week he declared that the party whip system has no place in the presidential election selection process, and this week he said that the whip system predates the Constitution in his final ruling. Interesting, isn't it? What a week does. They say a week is a long time in politics, but see what a week's like in the judiciary here in Ireland. But is anybody really surprised by this judgment in the context of the blocking of many independent candidates in the upcoming presidential election? Of course, people like Maria Steen were at 18, members of the Oireachtas, others had members of the local authorities, and under the Constitution, the only two ways of getting on the ballot are getting 20 members of the Oireachtas, that includes Adal and Shannon, and also 4 local authorities. Now, back in 1998, there was an Oireachtas all-party committee that reported back 27 years ago and said there'd be 3 ways should be extended democracy to the presidential ticket. And it said that one way would be 10 members of the Oireachtas, another way was 4 local authorities, and another way would be 10,000 signatures on a petition from members of the general public, people who are on the electoral register and citizens for the presidential election. But of course, we know this has never been actioned upon, and we're now in the situation where we have a presidential selection tomorrow. Only 3 candidates on the papers. And according to latest polls, Connolly is 17, 18 points ahead, and many are undecided, and many will spoil their ballot tomorrow. And in the context of what's been playing out in Irish society over the last period of time, we've seen the way the political establishment are working in cahoots with each other. And of course, we've seen the lack of local democracy. We've also seen the use of this party political system where they can write their own laws through electoral laws. They can also, in it all, come up with their own standing orders. And I spoke in my previous video about the use of standing orders in terms of the nonsense that went on a number of months ago with the so-called government versus opposition. And of course, in the Irish Constitution, it states that the members elected to Dáil Éireann represent their constituents. There's no mention of political parties in the Irish Constitution, but of course they'll say now, well, the party system now predates all this, and the whip system predates the Irish Constitution. And of course, it cannot be understated, but €20 million was spent or paid out of the public purse rather, on the party political system last year. So it's self-financing through the party political system, through the public purse. And this is how itself perpetuates and continues, and is very hard to break through. And then the illusion of choice is declared when we have this selection process with 2 of sides of the same kind, essentially, you might say, and 2 that will write the legislation into law. That's what the President of Ireland does, and of course we know what Michael D. Higgins did in his many years in Áras Nuachtaráin on his probably €300,000 a year salary, and also the 120 acres that surrounds Ars Neutron, the President's house up in the Phoenix Park. So, case was defeated today. Not really surprising, so much for the so-called separation of powers that they always try and declare. But here we go. Tomorrow the choice is yours. And record low turnout, I'd imagine, and also record amounts of spoiled vote tomorrow as well, because of the lack of democracy in this whole charade, farce, sham that's really taken place in Ireland over the last few months. So thanks so much for the support of my videos, really appreciate them as we look at the beautiful clock tower here in Rathmines at the end. Four-faced lawyer, it's known as well locally. So thanks so much, and slán go fóill. Take care. Bye bye.